Hey Mag,
Hey Iron, what's up?
I have a video here. You want to debunk it with me?
Oh, what is it?
In this episode, I explain why anarchism will never work.
Oh god, this one's going to be a doozy. Ah, let's get this over with.
Hello, I'm Paul Himmelstrand, this is Finding Reason. Today's episode, I'll be talking about anarchism. And I'll be talking about this because of various arguments I've seen from the camps of, say, anarcho-capitalism, which is the absence of a state to promote capitalism.
Actually, the true definition of anarcho-capitalism is the belief that the state is an unethical institution. And the only way to achieve a truly free society is to abolish the state and oblige by natural law or the non-aggression principle, aka NAP.
Say anarcho-capitalism, which is the absence of a state to promote capitalism, anarcho-communism, which is the absence of a state to promote communism, and then just various forms of anarchism that don't necessarily apply to those two categories. So as it pertains to this video, I'll just say that politically I consider myself an anarchist libertarian. If you're not aware what an anarchist is, it's another word for the night watchman state, and it's basically saying that the primary role of the government should be strictly for security measures, the military, police, and certain others.
Explain to me how the government has done well in any of those things. Remember the drug war? And it was made to keep black and poor communities down? So, your government that you keep on hyping up has sent soldiers to pointless drug war. So in 2003, the drug war has killed 500,000 victims. And if you think private police does a better job than public police, watch this video.
Get back out. I didn't do anything, you guys. Get your arm out. 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 It's under me. It's your fault. I didn't do anything, you guys. Lateral hit. I didn't do anything. You got to bend the elbow again. This one? Yes. Okay. You can't everything, you guys. You don't have to. Take it out. Bring your arm. I can't. Ouch! Ouch! That's it. Hey! Relax the body. Hey! Stop it! There you go. Stop doing this to me. Give me your other arm. Your arm. Under me. It's pushed under me. Other arm under me. We need another arm. Rip it out. Let me give me that arm. It's under me. Give me that arm. Hey!
I could go on, but I think you get my point.
I don't believe in a stateless society, mainly because I don't think it's even possible.
I'll leave a link in the description. Tom Wilson said it better than I ever could, and a lot more than what I can say here. But you want an example of it working? Well, here it is. Medieval Ireland is a well-documented historical example of how a stateless society can actually work. The lawmakers did not have any power just because they held the title of representative. They were powerless unless they could convince some of the free folk to follow with them. This kept injustice in check. Also, farmers can change between different alliances without actually moving to the new graphic location. This makes all a nation's structure truly voluntary. Again, go check the link in the description. It has even more proof than what I can say here.
I think between the two camps, anarcho-capitalism makes more sense than anarcho-communism, mainly because anarcho-communism to me is an oxymoron. I think it requires a very large state to get to the point where you could say it technically worked, but by that point it'd be impossible for you to actually abolish it.
At least we can agree on one thing. Anarcho-communism doesn't make any sense at all.
So for this video, I'm going to have you imagine that we're already living in a stateless society and working our way out, instead of trying to idealize a movement where you have less and less government to the point of having nothing. To me, it's easier to illustrate if you already imagine there's no state. So in this stateless society, let's imagine there's no law enforcement.
Wait a second, are you joking? There's a thing called the non-aggression principle. Allow me to read you the definition. The non-aggression principle is a stance that aggression is inherently wrong. You call yourself a libertarian and you seem to never heard of the non-aggression principle. Are you sure you're not a conservative?
And there is a person that is trying to kill you because you have more money than them. What is the person supposed to do to protect themselves? So I don't think it's much of a stretch for me to say that there's still going to be people that are going to try to rob people, people who are going to try to kill people, and there's no established state bureaucracy to delineate some type of security. And so in this stateless society, they would have to gain access to law enforcement of some kind.
I'm just Amazed. Wow. It's because your quote-unquote Lord and Savior, government, regulates guns.
I mean, just look at crime rates and death rates within gun-free zones. When governments try to regulate our freedom, we just become sitting ducks.
I'm gonna leave a link in the description below about the video I made about guns.
So the simplified answer is usually just to hire some privatized version of security or police officers to fill this role. However, you have to consider just hiring a single police officer is going to be almost impossible for you, because if you're a low-income worker or a middle-income worker, it's going to almost eliminate all of your resources.
With competition, the price of protection will go down, either competing for the cheapest, the best protection, or both. Power to the free market!
You would basically have to pitch in with other people, a community of people paying in to actually support this single police officer. But of course, that's not going to stop there. It's going to be a network of police officers, because a single police officer is not going to run a whole town in most situations. And so you'd have to have a fairly decent-sized group of people that interconnect and actually form this police department.
Alright, then think about this. When you go to a mall, the cops are not only just protecting their bosses who's paying them, they're also protecting the customers that don't pay them.
Yeah, I don't think companies are gonna kill people because, well, killing people is bad for business. And also that would be breaking the non-aggression principle.
And so the problem with the scenario is that it basically initiates a de facto form of taxation, which is really no different than how you pay for police officers today.
The difference is taxation is forced. Don't believe me? Don't pay your taxes. See what happens. People under anarchy can volunteer their own free will to support something or keep to themselves with their own guns.
So that part doesn't really make sense to me. You're not really paying for the single police officer. You're paying for all of the resources that come with it. Not just one police officer, but several. You have to pay for all of the evidence collection equipment. You have to pay for their vehicles, the vehicle maintenance. There's all kinds of expenses that people don't consider when they're talking about police officers. It's actually pretty crazy. There's a reason why it costs so much to pay for them and the military.
Yet the ones we pay for nowadays suck. Policemen have no incentive to help out people. Cops will literally refuse cases just because it isn't for the good of the community. Bullshit, it isn't for the good of the community to help out the people within the freaking community. Government-run police don't want to help out people, but private ones do, who in statistics have shown this by crime rates going down. With competition, they will want to serve the best service for the lowest price. Since government is not taxing people anymore, it is so much more likely for people to be able to afford for their own protection. Why should we have to give our money to someone else for us to get a shittier version when we can keep our money and spend it on our protection that we want? Kind of seems counterintuitive.
The second part of that scenario that gets ignored is the concept of rule of law, where officers need some type of manual to enforce the law. They need to know what's illegal and what's not, and that in today's society is established federally in a lot of ways. Homicide across the board is illegal, robbery across the board is illegal, and you have different statutes that are somewhat different, state to state or city to city, but there's definitely a blanket slate of terms that we generally agree is all wrong.
We do have some laws. It's called the NAP. For example, don't steal, injure, or murder others.
The problem is who makes those rules. So let's say Agency A, the collective has hired, says these types of laws are going to be in effect, and Collective B has a different set of laws that they want to put in effect. How do you mediate those two agents?
Different places will have their own laws adding to the NAP like we already do with the states. And these cases will be solved within private courts.
So the problem you eventually run into is that the people that have access to the most money are going to be the ones actually creating the laws.
Are we in the Twilight Zone or something? Because I keep on hearing the same points over again, but in different context.
Because I'm looking at this from a business aspect where they're just being paid to do whatever they're supposed to do. So if Guy A has $100,000 and Guy B has $10,000, and Guy A says, I'll pay you this much more money if you just enforce this laws over this set of laws.
The reason why monopolies will never form into the society is because businesses can't keep buying off every single law, otherwise they will go broke.
Dude, literally government is one big monopoly for public health care. That's why it's so expensive.
And they're obviously going to accept guy A because they're just a company trying to make money, so who cares about guy B? And so from just a strictly profit motive angle, I don't think it works. I think you have to have some type of governing rule of law to actually keep those things from happening. While it certainly gets taken advantage of, having a completely stateless society only makes it worse.
We already do. It's called the NAP in private courts.
Did you not hear us say non-aggression principle over and over again? How can you debunk us if you don't even know what that is?
Man, I wish I made this into a drinking game. At least it would be fun that way.
Then think of the situation in which one company gains too much power and they effectively become their own form of military. They're not beholden to anybody but themselves, and so they could do really whatever they want. And so you have to consider the ramifications of what could happen when said company gains too much power.
Again, monopolies cannot form into the system because they can't keep buying off people. Well, since there is competition. If they start fucking up, their customers will leave them. This makes sure businesses keep in line and making sure the customers' needs come first. Otherwise, they will lose their money. And no business wants that.
There's also the situation in which either individuals or groups of people cannot afford this police service. So if it's just one person that's not getting this service, he can't afford it for whatever reason, that person is going to be neglected and has no access to the security and could potentially be killed because of it.
Yet again, police and malls are not only there to protect their bosses, they're also there to protect you, even if you don't pay them. And since we are not taxed anymore, or people are much more likely to afford for protection, since we're basically already paying for it anyway.
But more so with the collective, where you could have one group that can't really pay for this police service as much as another group, and it costs more resources. Like, again, thinking this from a business angle, it costs more to supply police to an area with higher crime, and they're not able to pay for as much, so they just refuse them service over a certain amount of time. And you would basically have a whole community that has no access to the security, while the people that actually have money get more and more of it.
What the hell do you mean? The reason why people are poor is because of government.
Anyway, even in cases where the government tries to help out the poor, say like with welfare, or they blatantly said that it was made to keep the poor people poor. And why would they want to? If they keep people poor, they can keep having control over them. And the government loves controlling people.
I will admit that this is a little bit weaker of a counter argument, because I could see hypothetically, and I haven't actually seen anybody mention this personally, but I can see in the situation where there is a company that's willing to put up the risk and collateral in funding an organization that protects these impoverished communities. They're willing to risk less profit to actually protect these people. But I'm not totally sold that that would actually be the case. So then consider the whole idea of open borders, which would be effectively what happens if you have no bureaucracy to stop immigration.
Same example can be applied with education. Having open borders isn't a problem as long as you don't have things like welfare. You can either have two options. You can either have closed borders and have free programs for your citizens, or you have open borders but no free programs for your citizens. You can't have both, otherwise people would flood in and abuse the system like they do nowadays.
So if you have no borders whatsoever and everybody else does, where do you think all of the people are going to go that have any type of economic instability or are lower on the totem pole? They're all going to go to the country with no borders. And this isn't just a financial issue. The other big issue with limitless migration is security, where career criminals, people trying to seek asylum, or people who have cultures that promote certain criminal behavior counter to a different culture would all migrate to the one or handful of countries that adopt an open border policy.
If they're able to commit a crime in Ancapistan, then hats off to those people. But in all seriousness, what makes you think crime will happen in Ancapistan? Literally everyone has a gun, and I doubt that people know any criminals that are that stupid enough to commit a crime in Ancapistan.
And you really don't have to imagine this scenario, because it's already kind of happening within the EU, where their open border situation and loose migration policies have caused the country to experience a very large increase in financial debt, as well as an increase in violent crime.
Poor France. Funny how you're comparing Ancapistan to the EU when the EU is literally socialist and they ban guns, so not very good comparison.
The last issue I'll cover with this pertains to the military, where you have to have some type of protection from other places, because who knows if another country decides to invade your country, and so you have to have some form of protection when it comes to that.
Again, free markets will provide services like military, and if you don't like what the military is doing, you can just not support it. boom, they go out of business.
Now, you could make the argument that you could collectively fund this military, like I explained with the police scenario. The problem being that the consumers at large are only going to fund it as much as they feel they need it. And so times where they feel they're pretty safe in the world, they're not going to pay for a military as much. And whenever it actually comes time where a country decides to invade, you could run into a situation where the military is not large enough or capable enough to actually handle security.
I can see when people's guards are down and they're an easy target, but ask yourself this. Why do we go into war? Countries typically go into war because their leaders don't like each other. Look at almost any US history war and that will show it. But in a society without government, that won't happen.
See, while I think military spending is way too large in its current state, I don't then go into the camp of saying that we should just privatize it, because it really amounts to who wants to pay for it. There could be a sizable portion of people that just want to save more money or aren't as concerned with it, and so they don't pay into the system. Remember, it's stateless, and so it's supposed to be voluntary. And so you could have a very weak form of military simply because people don't, at that moment, feel the need for one.
And even if we had a weak military, if every person on every block has a gun, foreign nations will be hesitant to invade. Because you don't know which house you're barging into, or they can have a shotgun loaded aimed at your head if you don't get out of their house right frickin' now.
And just like with the police, you run into the same problem of having too much power into one collective, where these are just a bunch of businessmen and they're the ones running the show and there's nothing constraining them. And so what you could have happen is a military organization that decides to invade whatever area they feel like based on their own views. In fact, I think you run into an inevitable situation where you have multiple organizations warring for power. The people with the most armaments and the most financial capability would try to get the most power that they can to adopt their own ideologies. And you have a pretty scary situation where you have a very long and bloody war.
How many times do we have to keep on repeating ourselves? Killing your customers is bad for business, and they'll be breaking the non-aggression principle, which will get them killed.
So yeah, I think these are the biggest factors that prevent a stateless society from even being possible. I remember one person mentioning something about the Republic of Northern Syria being a good example of a state that's becoming stateless. But the funny thing is, when you actually look into that state of government, it's really only been around for like 4 or 5 years, and I wouldn't really call that a good example to establish your model on until it's actually existed for a little bit more time.
Somalia is a poor example, but it doesn't disprove you either. During its stateless period, everything in the country improved to the value of their currency, health, and lifespan, and etc. It isn't a great example, but it isn't wrong either. Iron, why'd you make me go through the twilight?
Hey, I'm the one who asked you, okay?
But why though?
Because I was kinda scared and I didn't want to do it alone.
Aw, don't worry, Mommy Meg will help you through it. And as painful as it was fun though, I have to admit that. But anyway, I'll be leaving now. Need you to come follow me on YouTube. I greatly appreciate it, but for now, bye!
United States, Canada, Mexico, Panama, Haiti, Jamaica, Peru, Republic Dominican, Cuba, Caribbean, Greenland, El Salvador too, Puerto Rico, Colombia, Venezuela, Honduras, Guyana, and still Guatemala, Bolivia, then Argentina, and Ecuador, Chile, Brazil, Costa Rica, Belize, Nicaragua, Bermuda, Bahamas, Tobago, San Juan, Paraguay, Uruguay, Suriname, and French Guiana, Barbados, and Guam. Norway and Sweden and Iceland and Finland and Germany now one piece. Switzerland, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Italy, Turkey and Greece. Poland, Romania, Scotland, Albania, Ireland, Russia, Oman. Bulgaria, Saudi Arabia, Hungary, Cyprus, Iraq and Iran. There's Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, both Yemen, Kuwait and Bahrain. The Netherlands, Luxembourg, Belgium and Portugal, France, England, Denmark and Spain. India, Pakistan, Burma, Afghanistan, Thailand, Nepal, and Bhutan, Cambodia, Malaysia, then Bangladesh, Asia, and China, Korea, Japan, Mongolia, Laos, and Tibet, Indonesia, the Philippine Islands, Taiwan, Sri Lanka, New Guinea, Sumatra, New Zealand, then Borneo and Vietnam, Tunisia, Morocco, Uganda, Angola, Zimbabwe, Djibouti, Botswana, Mozambique, Zambia, Swaziland, Gambia, Guinea, Algeria, Ghana. Burundi, Lesotho, and Malawi, Togo, the Spanish Sahara is gone. Niger, Nigeria, Chad and Liberia, Egypt, Benin and Gabon, Tanzania, Somalia, Kenya and Mali, Sierra Leone and Algier, Dahomey, Namibia, Senegal, Libya, Cameroon, Congo, Zaire, Ethiopia, Guinea-Bissau, Madagascar, Rwanda, Mayor and Cayman, Hong Kong, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Yugoslavia, Crete, Mauritania, then Transylvania, Monaco, Liechtenstein, Malta and Palestine, Fiji, Australia, Sudan.